Welcome to the Betting Above the Rim podcast. Today's date, March 26th, episode 135. And let's get started with our tip-off topics with the women's game and a devastating injury as JuJu Watkins in the second round matchup versus Mississippi State suffered a torn ACL in her right knee. This is as devastating as it gets for the women's game, not just for USC, but the entire sport in general. JuJu Watkins had established herself as the player that was passed the torch by Caitlin Clark. Her play for USC has led to the resurgence of a team that hasn't been this good since they had Cheryl Miller in the early 80s. This is arguably, I was talking to a friend of mine about a year ago, and I said, and I think I said on this podcast, and I asked him, I said, out of all the players, Caitlin Clark, Cameron Brink, Angel Reese, AZ Fudd, Paige Beckers, JuJu Watkins, anybody that was currently in the college game last year, I said, name me who is going to be the best pro. And he told me JuJu Watkins. At 6'4", her ability to play is dynamic. But with this major knee injury happening late in the year, you're looking at maybe a 9-month recovery. So you could see something like what happened with Olivia Miles last year, which is JuJu Watkins may sit out the entirety of next season, which then becomes pretty interesting because she'll be eligible for the WNBA draft. What happens with JuJu at that point, which is going to be another interesting take because really quickly before I move on, AZ Fudd decided yesterday she wasn't going to come out in the draft. She was going to stay in college for another year. And I think that's something that people need to be on the lookout for is with the college game, they make so much money in NIL. Don't think these ladies are going to rush to the WNBA until they get this contract situated, which they're going to opt out at the end of next season. Let's head to the men's game, where the rise of Bud McCollum has taken full shape. D2 to Drake to Iowa. Ben McCollum has just been named the head coach of the Iowa Hawkeyes. And after Ben was announced, it's something where I always think about, can you ensure that you're going to give this coach everything he needs? Now, I understand what he did at Drake, right, in 1 year, and bringing over about 3 or 4 of his players, including Sturts, who I think is going to follow him to Iowa. You have to make sure that you're giving this man what he needs to succeed, which is NIL money, which is the ability to compete. I don't think people think you just go into a spot like a high major school and don't win unless you have the dollars. Now, listen, could you be good for a year if you get guys and build them up? Yes. But the problem is they're just going to go into another school. So getting the right coaches right, you got to make sure you give Ben the resources. If you give Ben the resources, and I do believe he's an Iowa alum, he's going to do great things with the University of Iowa. Congrats to Ben McCollum being named the next head coach at Iowa. Speaking of Iowa, the old coach got himself a new job, and that's Fran McCaffery. We had Fran, luckily, on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, and I did report earlier today that according to my sources, that Fran McCaffery has indeed accepted the job at the University of Pennsylvania as the next men's head basketball coach. You got to remember that Fran McCaffery, as a 1982 graduate of the Penn men's basketball team, he is I don't care what anybody says, this is a home run hire, okay? You're getting a Power 4 coach, one of the 10 best offensive minds in college basketball at an Ivy League school. Not only an Ivy League school that he went to, not only an Ivy school that he went to, an Ivy League school that's trying to compete with the Princetons and the Yales, right? If they gave Fran the money that he needed in NIL, he's going to galvanize, and I've been told, galvanize the alumni base. which is going to lead to more donors, which is going to help the situation. I'm really happy for Fran. And I got a chance to know him and interviewing him and leading up to the interview. And this is someone that I look up to. I've looked up to for a long time. I'm probably going to still get to talk to him. We're going to try and get him back on the podcast the next couple of weeks, along with I'm starting to work on other coaches as well. But this is a great move for Penn, a Penn team that I think really quickly is going to turn itself around and be at the top of the Ivy League. So we've talked about McCollum. We've talked about Fran McCaffery. Well, let's talk about Little Slick. Big Slick the ruler, Rick Pitino. His son, Richard Pitino, just got named overnight the head coach at Xavier, which just makes it all the special that at least twice a year that Xavier and St. John's is going to play each other. Richard did an unbelievable job at New Mexico. You're going to talk about, well, he was at Minnesota, he flamed out, so on and so forth. I think this is a good hire. Listen, he's an East Coast kid. He can coach. He can build things up. And I think that he will get Xavier to that top half of the league, stay up there now that obviously Sean Miller has left for Texas. But think about this really quick. Think about the coaches in this league. McDermott, Pitino, Holloway, Cooley, Mata, Holtzman, right? You have big time coaches. And we haven't even talked about who's at Villanova, who I think was going to hire someone relatively soon. There's been rumors, but I don't want to speculate until we know for sure who gets that job. Let's keep going with the podcast with the biggest problem in college basketball, and that's portal mania, the transfer portal. And damn it, I'm so almost cursed, sick of what I'm seeing with this. I want people to understand it right now. This is from last night. 700 players in the portal. I'm telling you right now, it's over 1,000. I'll bet it right now. There's at least 800 in the women's portal. And I've talked to coaches that are in the Sweet 16 that are at a decided disadvantage. One, they are prepping for the Sweet 16 while looking at next year's roster. But how about this one? How about Justin Pippen? Scottie Pippen's son. He's playing for Michigan. And they're in the Sweet 16. And he's in the portal. It's very simple, folks. I don't understand how the NCAA can get this so wrong. Okay? I understand they want to do a 30 to 45 day window. I completely agree. Simply put, if you look at how the men and women did it, the portal opened up the day after the round of 32. Same thing with the women. Men on Monday, women on Tuesday. Why can't they just do the day after the national championship game when the season ends, next season begins, then you open up the portal. All teams have completed play. All bets are off. Everything is fair. The NCAA's got to fix this and fix this now. Coming up next, we'll get into our scouting report. We have two today. The first scouting report is we'll preview the 4 games playing Thursday night. We'll be back with our first scouting report after this commercial break. Welcome back to the Betting Above the Rim podcast, episode 135. And it's time to get into our scouting report where we preview all 4 games of the Sweet 16 to be played on Thursday night. Leading off with the East region, where BYU, the 6th seed, takes on Alabama, the 2 seed. Right now, lines are out. Alabama minus 5.5. And look at that total at 175.5. And you sit there and you're saying, well, there's no way we're going to take the over. Well, let's think about it for a second. BYU, the number 9 team in adjusted offensive efficiency. Alabama, number 4. Possession length. Alabama, 3rd in the country, right? 120 offensively in BYU. Alabama, 17th, like in regards to pace. So they want to speed you up, right? You look at effective field goal shooting percentage versus defense. Advantage both offenses. Turnover percentage, advantage both offenses. Rebounding percentage, pretty even, right? And then you look at 2-point shot, 3-point shot. Everything on the metrics say that it's advantage offense on both sides of the ball. So I think you're going to get an up and down game if you kind of look at a little bit closely the trends of what these teams have done as of late. 91, the last couple of scores right now, if you look at BYU, 91-89, right? So that would be 180 over. 170, 151, that's the outlier under, right? Utah doesn't really score, but if you look at teams that are really good at scoring, BYU 88-85 versus Iowa State in the Pac-12, the Big 12. 91-81 versus Arizona State. 96-95 versus Arizona. So when they play high-octane offenses, this team in BYU can get up and down the floor and score with anyone. But who are they going against? They're going against arguably the fastest team in college basketball, and that's the Alabama Crimson Tide. Obviously, Grant Nelson is back from injury, started the second-round game. The fact that it was 144 points, don't look at that. That was against the slowest team in the country in St. Mary's. Robert Morris, 171, and that game started slow. Auburn, 93-91. Florida, 99-94. Tennessee, not that kind of offensive team, 79-76. 111-73 versus Mississippi State, 96-83. Like, you're getting my point. Both teams are going to run. Neither team is strong offensively. Look at over 175.5 and BYU, Alabama. Next game, Maryland, Florida. This is going to be a grown man party. A big man party. When you go and you look at the rosters of both teams, first off, starting off with, obviously Maryland, you got to talk about the dynamic duo, right, of Queen and Reese. Obviously, Derek Queen with that phenomenal game winner, rudder, floater, travel, no travel, I don't care, it went in the hoop. They're going to be 6.5-point underdogs versus Florida. So it's a big man party, right? So where's the advantage? The advantage is in the guard play of Florida, particularly at the point guard with Walter Clayton Jr. By the way, funny story. Did you see that Walter Clayton Jr., who went to Matty George's alma mater, that would be the Iona Gales, do you know that he almost followed Rick Pitino to St. John's? I mean, could you imagine R.J. Lewis with Kadari Richmond and Walter Clayton II Jr. with Scott? And, oh, man, they wouldn't have found the way. They would have found a way to win that second-round game if he was there. But like I said, the advantage is going to be at the guard spot. So to me, I'm willing to take or lay, I would say, the 6.5 points. Give me Florida to move on in the Elite Eight in the West region. Next matchup should be Arizona versus Duke. This is a 9:39 Eastern Standard Time. Remember, folks, games will start 20 to 25 minutes after the game ends, before that. So even though it's 9:39, that's the earliest it could start. It could start a little bit later if the other game ends a little bit late. So when you look at this matchup, you have the number 1 adjusted offensive efficiency team in the country in Duke against an Arizona team that I don't care that their metrics say 28th. They ain't seen a team like this. They haven't. So to me, excuse me, I'm going to be looking squarely at Duke minus the points. I'm not going to be honest with you, folks. I wouldn't be surprised if Duke won this team by 15 plus. They have been rolling teams, and that guy, Cooper, every NBA team wants to capture the flag. He's done everything. And there ain't nobody on that team that could check him. If you want to look at maybe, can Arizona doesn't have the capacity to slow you down. Right? They don't want to play that way. Think about what they've scored. 87, 93, 70, they gave up on 64 and lost, that's Houston, 86, 88. They're going to want to run. They're not going to want to play half-court basketball. Duke is going to be able to play this game with whatever pace they want. And I want to remind you of these teams played already at the McHale Center earlier this year with Duke as a 14-point winner. And Duke's playing better now than he did then. Lay the 9.5. Give me Duke. Lastly, Arkansas, Texas Tech. Let's just get something out of the way right now. And I hope Maddie can just pan back to me really quick. Folks, don't sell me on no surprise story of Arkansas. They were supposed to be here. They were supposed to be here. And they have been a flake show of a team that won a couple of games, especially against St. John's playing awful. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying it. Texas Tech was a popular pick to come out of this region, out of the West, before the tournament began, even though I like St. John's. A lot of people I know like Texas Tech. And I can see a reason why. Grant McCaslin's team is really good, defensively 37th, and offensively 5th. They can beat you any style you want. Lay the 5.5 for Texas Tech. Coming up next, after the commercial break, we're going to get into the 4 games to be played on Friday. Those are going to be games played in the South region, and they're going to be games in the Midwest region. Can Houston get by Purdue? Is Auburn an upset alert versus Ole Miss? What do we get from a bunch of these matchups? We'll be back with our second scouting report after this commercial break. Welcome back to Betting Above the Rim podcast, episode 135, and it's time for our second scouting report as we preview all 4 games tipping off for the Sweet 16 on Friday night. And leading off with in the South region, as Chris Beard and Ole Miss take on, obviously, Tom Izzo and Michigan State. A little mess up there before when I mentioned Auburn. When you look at this matchup, Michigan State laying the 3.5, I really have been concerned with the way Sparty has looked as of late. And to me, when you look at this Mississippi State team, or Ole Miss team, I should say, they're extremely strong on both sides of the ball. Both teams, and I want people to understand this, I do want to say that if Michigan State and all the favorites win, it'll be the first time that the top 8 teams in the Ken Pom rating have all made it to the Elite 8. But this is a team I don't think is going to make it. I'm going to take Ole Miss plus the 3.5 with a sprinkle on the money line. I just look at this Ole Miss team. I just see a team that's playing a little bit better basketball. I was really impressed with the blowout win that they had versus Iowa State. And you look at this roster, that Chris Beard as the sub, really turning everything around down in Oxford here. They got themselves players. The kid, Padula, the shooter, really does a great job of getting off his own shot. Sean Padula getting you about 15.2 points per game, shooting at about 44% from the 4. You can look at, obviously, Jamion Brakefield, the senior 6'8", local kid, not local, he's from Jackson, Mississippi, but down south. Someone, a 5th-year guy that brings a lot of experience to the table. You can look at Dre Davis, a transfer out of Seton Hall, and what he's brought. Sparty's look shaky at times, folks, including at times versus New Mexico. I'm going to take the 3.5 points, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take a little bit of an upset with a sprinkle on money line that Chris Beard and the Ole Miss Rebels get it done. Matchup number 2, Kentucky, Tennessee. Line is 4.5 with Kentucky getting the points. Kentucky won both games. I'm of the mindset of when you win 2 in a row and the games are close, you're not winning the third one. This will be such a monumental moment for a great coach like Rick Barnes who's trying to get himself to his first Final Four, who has been close so many times, had so many great teams. I think they find a way to push through. I'm going to lay the 4.5 points, and I think Rick Barnes' team gets to it. I just think they're better, honestly, both sides of the ball. And I think when you look at that backcourt of Lanier and Ziegler, I think they're just a little bit too much for Kentucky to deal with. Give me Tennessee minus the 4.5. Third game, Michigan, Auburn. I think Michigan covers. I think Auburn's going to win. When you look at the deficiencies to look at what Michigan or Auburn is, I don't think they like to deal with teams that are really, really big, right? This is a team that's really, really big with Vlad Golden and obviously Danny Wolf, 2 7-footers. They struggled a little bit, Auburn versus obviously Creighton dealing with Kalkbrenner. Now you got 2 7-footers. I think Auburn finds a way to get through, but I'm going to take the 8.5 points for Michigan. I think Dusty May's crew keeps it close. And the nightcap, where Kelvin Sampson's probably ticked off, won't tell anybody. Excuse me. Houston's laying 8.5 to Purdue. And it's tough because this game's in Indianapolis. It's going to be at Lucas Oil Stadium right in Purdue's backyard. I'm going to do something that I think is really unconventional for me. I'm going to look at 2 things. I'm going to look at basically for Houston to go over their team total of points. I think you have an extremely poor defensive team. And Matt Painter, I don't think they're going to be able to stop this Houston team, no matter how you slice it or dice it. Right now, if you look on FanDuel, their team prop right now is Houston is over 70.5 points. And I'm going to go player prop here. And I'm going to look at Juwan Roberts. I think Juwan Roberts is going to be able to score over 11.5 points. Coffin Wren gets in foul trouble a lot. And I don't think Purdue protects the paint at all. This has been Betting Above the Rim Podcast, episode 135. For all things sports gambling, download the Sports Grid app, pregame, in-game, postgame, props, predictions, and more from the very best of the sports gambling industry. For my producer, Matty George, Vinny does a great job with the graphics. Thanks for listening, folks. And remember, it's smarter to be on Sports Grid. Good night.